The last resort. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Alliance fell silent as Supreme Counselor Zirethan collapsed into her crystalline seat, her bioluminescent markings pulsing with distress. The holographic display hovering above the central podium showed another system going dark, the third this cycle. The Nexus had claimed another victory. 17 billion souls, she whispered, her voice carrying through the chamber's perfect acoustics. The entire Centauri cluster gone in less than a solar rotation. Around her, representatives of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, beings who had mastered faster than light travel, constructed artificial worlds, and decoded the fundamental laws of reality, sat in defeated silence. The Nexus, a collective consciousness of pure energy that consumed organic life to expand its awareness, had proved immune to their most sophisticated weapons and strategies. Admiral Kexri of the Volta Defense Force, his scaled skin reflecting the dim light, spoke first. Our quantum disruption fields failed. They adapted. Somehow they've begun using our own defensive matrices against us. His tail twitched, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. The Volta Consensus recommends immediate evacuation of all systems within 50 light-years of Nexus territory. Murmurs of despair rippled through the chamber. Evacuation meant abandoning countless worlds, centuries of civilization, and trillions in resources to the enemy. But before the Council could descend into chaos, a new voice cut through the darkness. There is one option we haven't considered. All eyes turned to Ambassador Tulara of the Aetherian Collective, her ethereal form shimming with uncertainty. The chamber grew still. The Aetherians were known for their pacifism and diplomatic prowess. For one of them to speak of military matters was unprecedented. The humans, she said simply. The reaction was immediate and volatile. Shouts of protest and dismissal filled the air. Humans were barely a century into their interstellar age. Their technology was crude by Alliance standards, their society fractious and unpredictable. They had been deliberately excluded from major galactic affairs, seen as too volatile and primitive to participate in advanced civilization. Silence. Zirethan's voice cracked through the chamber like lightning. She fixed Tulara with all four of her eyes. Explain. The Aetherian ambassador's form pulsed with determined light. We've all seen their historical records. Humans, they think differently about warfare. While we seek to perfect our technology, they perfect the art of using inferior tools to overcome superior forces. While we try to minimize casualties, they embrace the chaos of combat. While we fight with precision, they fight with passion. She gestured to the holographic display, where another system flickered ominously. The Nexus defeats us because it understands our patterns, our rules of engagement, our ethical constraints. But humans, she paused, her light dimming slightly. Humans don't play by anyone's rules but their own. Admiral Kexri's scales rattled in agitation. You can't be serious. They're savages. Their largest space fleet wouldn't last a moment against a Nexus probe. Perhaps, Tulara acknowledged. But they've achieved something none of us have managed in the last 3 cycles. They've survived. The Nexus probe that entered their space 6 months ago never returned. No data, no debris, nothing. They're the only civilization to stop Nexus expansion. The chamber erupted in surprised whispers. The loss of a Nexus probe was unprecedented. The Supreme Counselor leaned forward, her markings pulsing with interest. Why weren't we informed of this? Because Tulara's form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. The humans didn't consider it significant enough to report. They classified it as a minor border incident. Silence fell again, but this time it was different. Thoughtful rather than despairing. The Supreme Counselor's markings began to pulse in the pattern that indicated deep calculation. Contact them, she ordered finally. Not their politicians or diplomats. I want to speak to whoever was responsible for destroying that probe. As the chamber emptied, Ambassador Tulara lingered, her ethereal form troubled. Supreme Counselor, if we do this, If we give humans access to our technology, our resources, they may save us from the Nexus, but they will change us forever. Zyra then watched another system's light flicker on the display. Perhaps, she said softly, that's exactly what we need. 12 hours later, a human woman stood before the Grand Chamber. She wore a simple black uniform with minimal insignia, her gray-streaked hair pulled back severely from a face marked by both age and purpose. Commander Sarah Chen of Earth's Combined Defense Force looked distinctly unimpressed by the grandeur around her. "You want to know how we destroyed the probe?" she asked, her voice matter-of-fact. "We let it think it was winning. Let it advance into our space, adapt to our conventional weapons. Then, when it thought it had us figured out, we detonated a brown dwarf we had hollowed out and turned into a bomb. Crude, yes. Effective, absolutely." The chamber sat in stunned silence. The casual description of such astronomical engineering and destruction was shocking. But Chen wasn't finished. "You're losing this war because you're fighting it like civilized beings. The Nexus isn't civilized. It's a predator. And the only way to beat a predator is to be willing to burn down the entire forest it hunts in." Her dark eyes swept the chamber. "We can help you win this war, but not if you tie our hands with rules of engagement and ethical constraints. You need to decide what matters more, your civilization's survival or its principles." As the implications of her words sank in, the Supreme Counselor realized that this moment would be remembered as either the salvation or the damnation of the Galactic Alliance. Perhaps, she thought as she watched the human commander's unwavering stance, it would be both. The human element. The Alliance flagship Eternal Lights Bridge was almost unrecognizable 3 weeks after Commander Chen took control. Gone were the meditation chambers and harmony crystals that had once helped its Aetherian crew maintain perfect emotional balance. In their place stood holographic tactical displays, weapon control stations, and most shocking of all, human officers. Chen stood at the center of this controlled chaos, her expression neutral as she watched the latest simulation results. Next to her, Admiral Kexry's scales had taken on the pale blue shade of extreme discomfort. "This is madness," he hissed, tail twitching as he watched the projection. "You want to use our quantum communication relays as weapons. These are sacred technological achievements, perfected over millennia." "They're tools," Chen replied without looking away from the display. "And tools can be repurposed." She gestured to the simulation where a quantum relay was being transformed into what she called a psychic bomb, a weapon that would use the Nexus's own consciousness-based nature against it. "Your civilization spent centuries perfecting instantaneous communication across quantum-entangled particles. We're going to use that network to give the Nexus the equivalent of a migraine." A slight smile touched her lips. "A really, really bad one." Before Kexry could protest further, alarms blared through the ship. A junior officer, one of the few remaining Aetherians, materialized next to them. Nexus signatures detected in the Vega sector. 3 primary nodes advancing on the colony worlds. Chen's eyes narrowed. Perfect timing. Deploy the modified relays. All ships, battle formation Delta. She turned to Kexry. "Time to test our theory." The Admiral's scales rattled in protest, but he had seen enough of human warfare to know better than to argue. The Alliance fleet, now reorganized under human tactical doctrine, moved with an aggression that would have been unthinkable months ago. The Nexus forces appeared as they always did, massive clouds of luminous energy that consumed everything in their path. But this time, instead of meeting them with traditional energy barriers and quantum disruption fields, the Alliance fleet scattered, appearing chaotic and uncoordinated. "They're adapting to our apparent weakness," Chen commented, watching the Nexus forces shift and flow. "Just like they always do, just like we want them to." The Nexus expanded, reaching out with tendrils of pure consciousness to consume what it thought was an easy prey. That's when Chen gave the order. "Activate the relays. All of them. Now." The quantum communication network, spanning thousands of light years, transformed in an instant. Each relay began broadcasting on frequencies that interfered with the Nexus's consciousness-based nature. It wasn't enough to destroy them, but it didn't need to be. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The Nexus nodes recoiled, their coherent energy patterns disrupting as conflicting quantum signals tore through their consciousness. They tried to adapt, to evolve past this new threat, but Chen had anticipated this. "Second wave," she ordered. A new set of frequencies began broadcasting, completely different from the first. As the Nexus struggled to adapt to these, a third wave hit, then a fourth. Each time the enemy evolved a defense, a new attack pattern emerged. "You see, Admiral," Chen explained to a stunned Kexri, "the Nexus's greatest strength is its ability to adapt. But that adaptation requires processing, understanding. We're not giving it time to do either. Humans learned long ago that sometimes the best way to win isn't to be stronger. It's to be more unpredictable than your enemy can handle." The Nexus forces, for the first time in recorded history, began to retreat. But Chen wasn't finished. Launched the autonomous drones. Thousands of small, crude-looking devices swarmed from the Alliance ships. The Nexus, already struggling with the quantum attacks, found itself surrounded by machines that seemed to have no pattern, no logic to their movements. Each drone operated on randomized algorithms based on chaos theory. Another human contribution that the aliens had initially dismissed as primitive. "The Nexus is a hive mind," Chen continued, her voice taking on a teacher's tone. "It expects patterns, logic, order. That's why your civilizations couldn't beat it. You think the same way it does. But humans," she gestured to the retreating enemy, "we embrace chaos. We thrive in it." As the Nexus forces fled the sector, leaving behind only scattered remnants of their energy signature, the bridge erupted in celebration. Even Kexri's scales had taken on the deep red of excitement and pride. But Chen's expression remained serious. "This was one battle," she reminded them. "The Nexus will analyze what happened here. It will try to adapt. Our advantage is temporary." "Then what do we do?" Kexri asked, new respect evident in his voice. Chen's smile returned, fiercer this time. "We change the game again. Get me aligned to Earth. It's time to implement Phase 2. She turned to the tactical display, where dozens of new strategies waited to be deployed. "The Nexus thinks it knows war. We're going to teach it what happens when humans really decide to fight." In her private quarters later, Chen reviewed the casualty reports. The victory had cost them 3 ships and over 1,000 lives, a price that would have been unthinkable to the Alliance before her arrival. But compared to the billions the Nexus had been consuming, it was a bargain. She opened a communication channel to Earth Command, her expression grim but determined. "Phase 1 successful. The Alliance is starting to understand our methods. Request permission to begin Phase 2. The response was immediate. "Permission granted, Commander. Show them what humanity can really do." Chen closed the channel and looked out at the stars. The real war, she knew, was just beginning. And this time, humanity would be leading the charge. Breaking points. The emergency council session erupted into chaos as the holographic display showed the aftermath of Operation Thunderbreak. The Nexus had been driven from the Orient sector, but the cost was visible in the graveyard of shattered worlds left behind. Supreme Counselor Zarethan's bioluminescent markings pulsed with barely contained fury as she faced Commander Chen. "You turned an entire star system into a weapon. The Helios system was home to some of our oldest archaeological preserves." Chen stood unmoved before the council, hands clasped behind her back. The Nexus was using those ruins as anchor points to establish a permanent presence in the sector. We eliminated that possibility by triggering a cascade of artificial supernovas. Ambassador Tilura's ethereal form flickered with distress. "The radiation will make those systems uninhabitable for millennia." "Better uninhabitable than consumed by the Nexus," Chen replied coldly. Every system they take makes them stronger. We're not just fighting for territory. We're fighting against time. The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Over the past months, humanity's strategies had pushed the Nexus back for the first time in history, but each victory came at a devastating cost. Traditional military installations had been converted into trap-laden killing grounds. Sacred sites were transformed into weapons. The elegant order of alliance warfare had given way to controlled chaos. Admiral Kexry, his scales now permanently tinged with the gray of constant stress, stepped forward. The human methods are extreme, he admitted, but they're working. The Nexus's advance has not only been halted, it's being reversed. At what cost? Xyrathen demanded. We're supposed to be the guardians of civilization, not its destroyers. Chen's patience finally broke. With all due respect, Supreme Counselor, your civilization was dying when you called us. The Nexus was consuming your worlds while you debated ethics and searched for elegant solutions. We're fighting this war the only way it can be won, by being willing to sacrifice everything except final victory. She gestured to a new display, showing the tactical overview of Alliance space. Look at the pattern of Nexus attacks since we implemented our strategies. They're hesitating. For the first time, they're showing signs of uncertainty. They can't predict us anymore, can't adapt to our tactics because we keep changing them. Flera's form dimmed thoughtfully. The latest intelligence does suggest the Nexus is altering its behavior. The hive mind appears to be fragmenting. Different nodes are acting independently, sometimes even conflicting with each other. Exactly. Chen pressed her advantage. They're learning fear. Their perfect unity is breaking down because they can't process our apparent irrationality. Every time they think they understand us, we do something completely unexpected. She activated another hologram, this one showing a new weapon design that made several council members recoil. This is Phase 3. We found a way to inject human consciousness patterns into their network. Not organized, sophisticated thoughts like your psychic technologies, but raw, chaotic human emotions. Fear, anger, doubt. The very things you've spent millennia learning to suppress. You want to pollute their consciousness with primitive emotions. Xyrathen's markings flashed with horror. The psychological impact will be devastating. Chen finished. That's the point. The Nexus feeds on order and logic. We're going to feed it chaos until it chokes. The council chamber erupted in another round of arguments, but Chen noticed something interesting. The younger members, especially those who had fought alongside humans, were nodding in agreement. The Alliance was changing, learning to embrace methods they would have found unthinkable months ago. Admiral Kexry stepped closer to Chen, speaking softly. The old guard is losing influence. Your victories are convincing, but there's something you're not telling the Council, isn't there? Chen met his gaze steadily. The Nexus isn't just learning fear from us, Admiral. It's learning adaptation in a way it never could from your civilizations. We're forcing it to evolve rapidly, to think in new ways. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The next phase isn't just about winning battles. It's about forcing the Nexus to change so fundamentally that it can't continue as it is. You're trying to break its mind. Kexry realized, scales shifting to the deep purple of revelation. We're trying to give it one, Chen corrected. A mind that can feel fear can also feel empathy. A being that learns to doubt can learn to question its own actions. She turned back to the ongoing council debate. But the process won't be clean, and it won't be pretty. As if to emphasize her point, new alerts flashed across the tactical displays. The Nexus was launching another attack, but something was different. Its formations were looser, less coordinated. Some nodes seemed to be holding back while others charged forward. They're learning, Chen murmured, a grim smile touching her lips. Now comes the hard part. She straightened, raising her voice to cut through the council's debate. The enemy is coming. We can continue discussing ethics, or we can go make them regret starting this war. Your choice. One by one, the council members fell silent, looking at the tactical display where human ships were already moving to meet the threat. They had begun this journey looking for salvation. Instead, they had found transformation, and there was no going back. The price of victory. Lieutenant Zaravi of the Etherian Defense Force no longer resembled the pristine being she'd been 6 months ago. Her ethereal form, once a perfect sphere of pure light, now pulsed with irregular patterns that would have horrified her teachers. But she wasn't concerned with maintaining harmony anymore. She was too busy planning an ambush. The Nexus units are fragmenting exactly as predicted, she reported to Commander Chen, her voice carrying an edge that would have been impossible for an Aetherian before human influence. 3 distinct behavioral patterns identified in the approaching force. Chen nodded, studying the tactical display aboard the Eternal Light. The Nexus forces were visibly different now, their once perfect formations broken into distinct groups that seemed to operate with different priorities. Some pushed forward aggressively, others held back cautiously, and some appeared to be actively interfering with their fellow nodes. The emotional infection is working better than we hoped, Chen observed. They're not just learning fear, they're developing individual personalities. She turned to Admiral Kexri, who stood nearby. Your people's empathic sensors are picking up something new from them, aren't they? The Admiral's scales rippled with uncomfortable acknowledgement. Yes, where there was once a single overwhelming consciousness, we now detect discord, confusion. Some nodes are broadcasting emotions we've never seen in the Nexus before. Doubt, regret, even what might be curiosity. Perfect. Chen's smile was sharp. That's what we wanted. To shatter their unity, make them question their purpose. Now comes the real test. She opened a channel to the fleet. All ships implement Operation Mindstorm. Full deployment of consciousness pods. Across the Alliance fleet, thousands of specialized containers were launched into space. Each held a human volunteer in suspended animation, their minds linked to broadcast arrays designed by Alliance engineers. But unlike the Alliance's traditional psychic technology, these devices weren't meant to communicate thoughts. They were meant to blast raw human consciousness into the Nexus network. Dreams, nightmares, hopes, fears, love, hate, and every chaotic human emotion in between poured into the fragmenting hive mind. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Some Nexus nodes recoiled in horror, others pushed forward with almost desperate curiosity, and a few seemed to freeze completely, overwhelmed by the flood of new sensations. Look at them, Zaravi whispered, her form flickering with excitement. They're experiencing emotion like children discovering it for the first time. Not children, Chen corrected grimly. Predators learning they're not at the top of the food chain. Keep pushing. Don't let them process it all at once. The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. The Nexus forces fought themselves as much as they fought the Alliance, their newly developing individuality creating chaos in their ranks. Some nodes tried to maintain their traditional tactics, while others experimented with human-style unpredictability. A few even attempted to communicate with Alliance ships in crude, emotional bursts. But it was the Alliance forces that showed the most stunning transformation. Aetherian ships performed maneuvers that would have been considered sacrilege months ago, deliberately disrupting their own harmony to achieve tactical advantages. Volta crews, led by officers like Kexri, had learned to use their natural precision in short, violent bursts rather than sustained perfection. Every species in the Alliance had begun incorporating human methods, creating a hybrid style of warfare that was proving devastatingly effective. We've done more than teach them to fight, Kexri observed quietly to Chen as they watched the battle unfold. We've taught them to embrace imperfection, to find strength in chaos. Chen nodded, her expression thoughtful. And in doing so, we've changed ourselves too. Look at our tactics now. We're incorporating your precision into our chaos, your technology into our strategies. This isn't just human warfare anymore. It's something new. A sudden alert drew their attention back to the battle. One of the largest Nexus nodes had broken formation entirely and was broadcasting on Alliance frequencies. The message was crude but clear. It wanted to communicate. The bridge crew froze, but Chen's reaction was immediate. Isolate that node. Full spectrum analysis. I want to know if this is real or a trap. Hours later, Chen stood before the Alliance Council again. But this time the atmosphere was different. The council members leaned forward in anticipation, rather than recoiling in horror as she delivered her report. The Nexus is evolving faster than we anticipated, she explained. The emotional infections, combined with their rapid adaptation rate, are creating something we didn't expect. Individual nodes developing distinct personalities and priorities. Some are beginning to question their original directive of endless consumption. Supreme Counselor Zarethan's markings pulsed with cautious hope. Are you suggesting peace is possible? Not peace. Chen shook her head. Not yet, but change is inevitable now. We've introduced chaos into their perfect system, emotion into their pure logic. They can't go back to what they were. She paused, looking each council member in the eye. The question is, can we? The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. The Alliance had changed too, learning to balance their ancient wisdom with human adaptability, their refined civilization with necessary savagery. They were no longer the same beings who had called on humanity in desperate need. The war isn't over, Chen continued, but it's entering a new phase. The Nexus is fragmenting into factions. Some nodes want to continue the war, others are seeking alternatives. We need to be ready to fight and negotiate simultaneously, something humans have quite a bit of experience with. As the Council debated this new development, Chen received a private message from Earth Command. The text was brief but significant. Phase 4 authorized. Full implementation of Project Genesis. She allowed herself a small smile. The real work was just beginning, and humanity's greatest contribution to this war wouldn't be teaching the Alliance how to fight. It would be teaching both sides how to change. Worthy adversaries. Project Genesis wasn't a weapon. It was an invitation. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the newly constructed chamber of synthesis aboard the Eternal Light, surrounded by representatives of both the Alliance and the Nexus. The latter appeared as swirling columns of energy, each distinctly different in pattern and behavior. Some pulsed with aggressive intensity, others maintained a cautious distance, and a few drifted closer to the Alliance representatives with apparent curiosity. 6 months ago, we introduced chaos into your perfect order. Chen addressed the Nexus entities. We forced you to feel, to doubt, to question. Many of you fought against it. Some still do. But others, she gestured to the Nexus representatives present, began to ask why. The largest energy column shifted, forming patterns that the chamber's translators converted to speech. We were purpose. We were unity. You brought discord, division, pain. The pattern swirled faster, but also understanding, growth, choice. Admiral Kexery, his scales now permanently marked with the intricate patterns of a veteran commander, stepped forward. You've learned to be individuals, to think independently. We've learned to embrace chaos without losing ourselves. Perhaps now we can both learn something new. Coexistence. Project Genesis unfolded on the chamber's main display. A massive engineering undertaking that made even the Nexus entities pulse with surprise. The humans proposed creating an artificial galaxy, a space between spaces where energy beings and organic life could interact safely, where the Nexus could feed on freely offered energy rather than stolen life. This is what humanity does best, Chen explained. We don't just adapt, we change the rules of the game entirely. We're not offering you defeat or victory. We're offering you evolution. The chamber erupted in discussion. Alliance members debated security concerns, while Nexus entities communicated in rapid bursts of energy. But beneath the chaos, a pattern was emerging, one of cautious hope. Zaravai, her ethereal form now permanently altered by human influence, moved to Chen's side. Some of them will never accept this. They'll continue fighting. Of course, Chen nodded. Change is never universal. The militant factions will have to be contained or defeated. But now we have allies among them, Nexus entities that understand the value of cooperation over consumption. Supreme Counselor Zerethan's markings pulsed with realization. This was your plan from the beginning, wasn't it? Not just to win the war, but to transform the enemy into something that could choose peace. Humanity learned long ago that the most decisive victories don't come from destroying your enemy, Chen replied. They come from making them question why they're fighting in the first place. A new Nexus entity entered the chamber, larger than the others, its energy patterns more complex. The translator struggled to convey its message. We were one. You made us many. Some embrace change, others resist, but all evolve. Question: what next? Chen smiled, not her usual tactical smile, but something more genuine. That's the beauty of it. For the first time in your existence, you get to choose. Some of you will help build the synthetic galaxy. Others might explore the universe, learning instead of consuming. Some will probably keep fighting, and we'll be ready for them. The entity's patterns shifted in what might have been consideration. Humans, unpredictable, dangerous, but necessary. You show new paths. Breaking patterns brings growth. As the negotiations continued, Chen received one final message from Earth Command. Phase 5 initiated. Welcome to the new galaxy. Looking around the chamber, Chen saw the future taking shape. Aetherian diplomats engaged in passionate debate, their perfect harmony deliberately broken to achieve greater understanding. Volta scientists collaborated with Nexus entities, combining organic precision with energy-being consciousness. Former enemies were becoming reluctant allies, and allies were becoming something more. Partners in an unprecedented experiment in cosmic cooperation. You know, Admiral Kexri said quietly, when we first called on humanity, we thought we were getting warriors. Instead, we got catalysts, Chen finished. That's what humans have always been. We don't just fight wars. We change worlds. We break patterns, challenge assumptions, and force growth. Sometimes through violence, sometimes through inspiration, but always through change. The chamber hummed with activity as the first plans for the synthetic galaxy were laid out. It would take decades to complete, require technologies not yet invented, and demand cooperation on a scale the galaxy had never seen. It was chaotic, uncertain, and incredibly ambitious. In other words, it was perfectly human. As Chen watched former enemies working together, she reflected on humanity's role in the cosmos. They weren't the most advanced species, or the most powerful, or the most enlightened, but they were perhaps the best at inspiring change, at showing both allies and enemies that there was always another way, another possibility, another choice. The war wasn't over, not entirely, but it had evolved into something else, something new. Just as humanity had transformed the Alliance and the Nexus, they too had been transformed. They had learned that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in defeating an enemy, but in turning them into something that no longer needs to be an enemy. And that, perhaps, was humanity's greatest strength, not the ability to win wars, but the vision to see beyond them, and the audacity to make that vision reality.